For most of the world, Meryl Streep is not just an actress, she is a standard. A benchmark of excellence that has towered over Hollywood for more than 4 decades. Awards, acclaim, and cultural reverence have followed her everywhere. But inside her own home, far away from premieres and applause, a very different story has been unfolding. One centered not on fame, but on family. Streep and sculptor Don Gummer raised 4 children largely outside the machinery of celebrity. While the public often assumes children of icons grow up privileged, polished, and destined for stardom, the reality for the Streep-Gummer household was far more intentional. Privacy was protected. Normalcy was valued. And each child was encouraged to discover who they were without pressure to replicate their mother's success. By 2026, that quiet upbringing has produced something rare. None of Meryl Streep's children live loudly in her shadow. Yet each has built a life that reflects creativity, discipline, and self-awareness. Their stories aren't about rebellion against legacy, nor about cashing in on it. They're about navigating the emotional complexity of being adjacent to greatness and still choosing authenticity. That journey begins with the eldest, Henry Wolfe Gummer, choosing the quiet road. Henry Wolfe Gummer was born into a world already saturated with meaning. As the first child of one of the most respected actresses alive, Henry grew up surrounded by art, conversation, and creativity, but also by an unspoken understanding that expectations existed long before he could define himself. From an early age, Henry showed artistic curiosity, but not the kind that demanded attention. Where some children of celebrities lean into visibility, Henry instinctively leaned away. He valued solitude, process, craft, and most importantly, autonomy. Like many creative young adults, he initially explored acting. He enrolled at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, one of the most prestigious training grounds for performers in the world. For 2 years, Henry immersed himself in dramatic study, surrounded by peers who dreamed of stages and screens. Yet, instead of feeling energized, he felt constrained. Acting, he realized, was dependent. Dependent on casting, on approval, on waiting. For someone who thrived on daily creation, that rhythm felt wrong. Leaving Tisch was not a dramatic break. It was a moment of self-honesty. Henry wasn't rejecting art. He was refining his relationship with it. Music had always been present, but now it became central. Unlike acting, music gave Henry something immediate and personal. He could write, rehearse, and complete a piece without permission. Songs offered emotional resolution. They didn't require an audience to exist, and in that space, Henry found his voice. Under the name Henry Wolfe, he began releasing music that was intimate, restrained, and quietly confident. His work never chased trends or spectacle. Instead, it leaned into mood, texture, and lyrical reflection. The kind of music that earns listeners slowly rather than loudly. Over time, his compositions found their way into film, including Julie and Julia and Ricky and the Flash, both starring his mother. While those connections inevitably drew attention, Henry's contributions were never framed as favors. They stood as functional, thoughtful pieces that complemented the films rather than overshadowing them. Still, being Meryl Streep's son has never been a simple advantage. Henry has spoken candidly about the psychological weight of legacy, about how the presence of such an iconic figure can unintentionally eclipse one's own narrative. He has acknowledged gratitude for opportunity, while also expressing frustration at assumptions, that success comes easily, that effort is optional, that his work must always be filtered through lineage. Those assumptions, he said, can quietly undermine credibility. Rather than confront them publicly, Henry chose distance. He avoided the celebrity circuit, he limited exposure, and he allowed his work to circulate without constant explanation. In his personal life, that same philosophy continues. Henry married Tamron Storm Hawker in 2019, and together they have built a family far removed from Hollywood spectacle. They welcomed their daughter in 2020 and their son in 2022. Fatherhood, by Henry's own reflections, has deepened his commitment to privacy, reinforcing the idea that presence matters more than recognition. In many ways, Henry Wolfe Gummer represents the most understated response to legacy. He didn't reject it. He didn't exploit it. He simply stepped sideways and built something of his own. Mamie Gummer and the Weight of Inheritance. For Mamie Gummer, growing up around greatness was never about glamour. It was about proximity, watching excellence up close, and learning that talent alone was never enough. Discipline mattered. Curiosity mattered. And above all, the work mattered more than the applause. Mamie's earliest brush with acting came before she could even form memories. At just 20 months old, she appeared alongside her mother in the 1986 film Heartburn. But rather than proudly showcasing her daughter, Meryl Streep made a deliberate choice. Mamie was credited under the pseudonym Natalie Stern. It was a quiet but telling decision, one that revealed how fiercely Streep protected her children from premature visibility. That philosophy shaped Mamie's childhood. She grew up largely outside the Hollywood machine, attending school, forming friendships, and developing interests without the constant glare of cameras. At home, she has often said, her mother wasn't a screen legend, she was simply Mom. That distinction grounded Mamie early on and helped her separate admiration from imitation. As she reached adulthood, Mamie didn't rush into the industry. She experimented first, briefly exploring modeling, before realizing that performance, not image, was where her instincts truly lay. Acting, for Mamie, wasn't about recognition. It was about expression and emotional truth. Her Broadway debut in Mr. Marmalade marked a turning point. Theater demanded presence, vulnerability, and stamina, qualities that couldn't be inherited or explained away by a famous surname. On stage, Mamie earned credibility the hard way, night after night, with no edits and no safety net. Critics took notice, not because of who her mother was, but because she brought seriousness and depth to her performances. Film followed gradually. 2 decades after Heartburn, Mamie returned to the screen in The Hoax, 2006, acting opposite Richard Gere. A year later, she appeared in Evening, a quiet drama that reunited her with Streep on screen. Their chemistry was natural, but the project also underscored something important. Mamie wasn't being positioned as a replica. She played younger versions, parallel emotions, not imitations. Their most emotionally complex collaboration came in 2015's Ricky and the Flash. In the film, Mamie portrayed a daughter carrying deep resentment toward her mother's character, a dynamic that mirrored real-world tensions many families experience. Mamie later admitted she worried that delivering such sharp, painful lines might hurt her mother personally. What happened instead stayed with her. After the first take, Mamie looked up to see Streep smiling. Not defensively, not emotionally wounded, but genuinely proud. It was a moment of recognition between equals. Not mother and child, actor to actor. That reassurance allowed Mamie to step fully into her power, confident that she wasn't betraying her upbringing by expressing complexity. Television soon became Mamie's strongest canvas. Over the years, she built a steady, respected career across a wide range of shows. She appeared in The Good Wife and The Good Fight, navigating intricate legal and political storylines with intelligence and restraint. In True Detective, she explored darker psychological territory. In Emily Owens, MD, she carried a lead role, learning firsthand the demands of anchoring a series. Later projects like The Right Stuff further demonstrated her adaptability and composure. What stands out about Mamie's career is consistency rather than spectacle. She doesn't chase headlines. She doesn't cultivate mystique. Instead, she shows up prepared, grounded, and emotionally precise, traits often associated with longevity rather than instant fame. Her personal life has followed a similar rhythm of change and renewal. After an early marriage that ended quietly, Mamie found lasting partnership later in life. In 2019, she welcomed a son, making Meryl Streep a grandmother for the first time. Streep's reaction was characteristically warm and humorous, once joking that she was already preparing to overwhelm her grandchild with advice. Motherhood added another layer to Mamie's identity, one that deepened her appreciation for balance. Career remained important, but not at the cost of presence. Like her brother Henry, Mamie has increasingly prioritized a life that feels whole rather than publicly impressive. In many ways, Mamie Gummer represents the most traditional artistic path among Streep's children. but also the most quietly defiant. She embraced acting fully, yet refused to let legacy define her worth. She earned respect, not through proximity to greatness, but through patience, humility, and resilience. And in doing so, she proved something essential. Growing up next to an icon doesn't have to mean disappearing behind them. Grace Gummer and the power of restraint. If Henry Wolfe chose distance and Mamie chose patience, Grace Gummer chose restraint, a quality that has quietly defined her entire career. Grace grew up in the same carefully protected household as her siblings, where fame was acknowledged but never worshipped. Creativity was encouraged, but attention was not. From an early age, she absorbed an understanding that substance mattered more than spectacle, and that being seen was less important than being prepared. Her first experience with acting came in 1993, when she appeared in The House of the Spirits, portraying a younger version of one of her mother's characters. Like Mamie before her, Grace was credited under a pseudonym, Jane Grey. The decision was not about secrecy for secrecy's sake. It was about allowing a child to participate in art without being labeled by lineage before she could even choose a path. Despite that early exposure, Grace didn't rush toward acting as a destiny. Instead, she took an academic route, enrolling at Vassar College, her mother's alma mater. There, she studied art history and Italian, disciplines that reflected curiosity rather than career calculation. Those studies deepened her understanding of narrative, symbolism, and human behavior, all of which would later surface subtly in her performances. After graduating, Grace turned seriously toward acting, but again without theatrics. She began in theater, where credibility must be earned nightly. One of her early stage roles in The Sexual Neurosis of Our Parents allowed her to explore complex psychological terrain far removed from mainstream expectations. It was challenging, uncomfortable work, and that was precisely the point. Television followed gradually. Grace appeared in Nickelodeon's Gigantic, gaining early on-camera experience without being thrust into prestige spotlight. A small role in Larry Crown, 2011, added film exposure, but it was her performance in Frances Ha, 2012, that subtly shifted perception. Directed by Noah Baumbach and co-written by Greta Gerwig, Frances Ha was understated, intimate, and character-driven, a perfect environment for Grace's restrained style. She didn't dominate scenes, she grounded them. Critics noticed her presence, not because it demanded attention, but because it felt real. That same year, she appeared on Smash, a series centered on Broadway's high-pressure world, a space that resonated with her theatrical background. From there, Grace's career expanded steadily, almost methodically. Over the next decade, she built one of the most impressive television resumes among second-generation Hollywood actors. Her credits include The Newsroom, American Horror Story, Extant, Mr. Robot, and Dr. Death. Across genres, political drama, psychological horror, science fiction, and true crime, Grace consistently delivered performances marked by intelligence and emotional control. What made her stand out wasn't volume or intensity, but precision. She often portrayed characters under pressure, professionals carrying secrets, women navigating moral gray zones, individuals whose internal lives were richer than what they revealed outwardly. It was acting that trusted the audience, and that trust paid off. Despite growing recognition, Grace never embraced celebrity culture. Interviews were rare. Social media presence remained minimal. She allowed her work to speak, while her personal life stayed largely private. That privacy was tested briefly in 2019, when she married musician and actor Tay Strathern, son of David Strathern. The marriage ended quickly, finalized in 2020, and Grace handled it without public commentary, a pattern consistent with her approach to life. A new chapter opened in 2021, when Grace married renowned producer Mark Ronson. Their relationship blended music, film, and shared creative sensibilities without turning into spectacle. The ceremony itself reflected that ethos: intimate, understated, and intentional. In 2023, the couple welcomed their first child, a daughter. And in late 2024, Grace appeared publicly pregnant again, confirming they were expecting a second child. Even these milestones were shared quietly, often through indirect confirmation rather than announcements. Motherhood, like everything else in Grace's life, has been integrated rather than displayed. Among Meryl Streep's children, Grace may be the least publicly discussed, and yet, in many ways, the most emblematic of the family's values. She built a career through consistency, she avoided shortcuts, and she allowed time to do its work. Grace Gummer didn't try to escape her mother's shadow. She simply stepped into her own light, softly, steadily, and on her own terms. Louisa Jacobson and the next chapter. If the older Streep Gummer children learn to define themselves quietly, Louisa Jacobson represents the next evolution of that philosophy, one shaped by intention, preparation, and emotional intelligence rather than urgency. As the youngest child of Meryl Streep and sculptor Don Gummer, Louisa grew up watching her siblings navigate adulthood before her. That vantage point gave her something rare: perspective. Fame was never presented as a goal. Instead, curiosity, education, and personal growth were encouraged long before career ambition entered the conversation. Like her mother and sister Grace, Louisa attended Vassar College, but she chose to study psychology rather than performance. The decision reflected a deep interest in human behavior, how people think, react, and carry emotion beneath the surface. That academic foundation would later become one of her greatest strengths as an actor. Rather than moving directly into professional roles after graduation, Louisa did something increasingly rare in modern entertainment. She slowed down. She pursued formal training, earning a Master of Fine Arts from the Yale School of Drama, one of the most respected conservatories in the world. She also studied at the British American Drama Academy in Oxford, immersing herself in classical technique and disciplined performance traditions. This was not the path of someone chasing visibility. It was the path of someone building durability. Louisa made another deliberate choice early on. She performs professionally under the name Louisa Jacobson, rather than Louisa Gummer. The decision was partly logistical, due to Screen Actors Guild rules, but it also carried symbolic weight. It allowed her to establish a professional identity that felt earned, distinct, and self-defined, while still honoring her family roots. Her early work focused on theater, where training matters more than followers. In 2018, she appeared in The Memoir of the Wedding at the Williamstown Theater Festival, delivering a performance that drew quiet praise for its sensitivity and restraint. The role reinforced what many in the industry already sensed: Louisa wasn't interested in shortcuts. Her screen debut came in 2019 with the television movie Gone Hollywood, where she acted opposite Nikolai Coster-Waldau. While the project introduced her to a wider audience, it was clear her career was still in its formative stage. That changed in 2022. Louisa was cast as Marion Brooke in HBO's lavish period drama, The Gilded Age. Set in late 19th century New York, the series placed her at the emotional center of a sprawling ensemble led by Christine Baranski. As Marion, Louisa portrayed a young woman navigating rigid social hierarchies with quiet resolve, a role that required subtlety rather than spectacle. Critics responded positively, noting her naturalism and emotional clarity. She didn't dominate scenes, she anchored them. Her performance felt thoughtful, lived in, and intelligent, qualities that echoed her academic and theatrical training. Despite her rising profile, Louisa has remained refreshingly candid and grounded. In interviews, she often speaks affectionately and humorously about her relationship with her mother. She has joked about Streep's tendency to worry excessively, to ask too many logistical questions, and to mimic accents when speaking to people who have one. These anecdotes humanize an icon, revealing a family dynamic rooted in warmth rather than reverence. In her personal life, Louisa reached another milestone in 2024 when she publicly shared her relationship with her girlfriend, Anna Blundell. The response, she later said, was overwhelmingly supportive. Speaking in 2025, Louisa expressed gratitude for working within an artistic community that embraces openness and inclusion, noting how affirming the experience had been. What stands out most about Louisa Jacobson is not how quickly she has risen, but how intentionally she has moved. She didn't rush into fame. She didn't trade on novelty. She prepared, waited, and stepped forward only when ready. And in doing so, she completed a remarkable picture. Together, Meryl Streep's 4 children represent 4 different responses to legacy. One chose music and privacy. One chose acting through patience and resilience. One chose television through restraint and depth. And one is building a future defined by preparation and authenticity. None of them tried to replace their mother. None of them tried to escape her shadow. They simply learned how to stand beside it and still be seen. Meryl Streep's legacy is undeniable. But her children's stories remind us that greatness doesn't have to be inherited. It can be redefined. Which of her children's journeys resonated with you the most? Do you think growing up around excellence makes finding your own path harder or clearer? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep human look at life beyond Hollywood legend, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories about fame, family, and the quiet choices that shape extraordinary lives.